Hello, and welcome to A Postdoc's Journal, the show that takes you through my journey into and eventually out of academia as a postdoctoral research scientist. My name is Simit Patel. Hello, thank you very much for joining me. Welcome back to those of you who may have listened to the show before, and a very warm welcome to those of you who may be listening for the very first time. If you don't already know, this podcast is based on my own personal journal. In each episode, I read out a journal entry from about 11 or 12 years ago, back when I was working in academia as a research scientist, as a postdoc. Then I reflect on it, I analyze it, I try to make sense of it, and I share my thoughts with you today with the benefit of hindsight. If you are someone who can relate to things like imposter syndrome, loneliness, and just mental health issues in the workplace, whether you're in academia or not, I hope that by sharing my own personal experience with you, it helps you to feel a little bit less alone. In today's episode, we jump to June 2014, about 2 months after the last episode. In the last episode, I ended up on a somewhat positive note. I was looking forward to lots of things at work, submitting that snail paper, working on a project I really enjoyed, and various other things happening in my personal life. However, in this journal entry, I end up documenting the very first time that I thought that I might be suffering from depression. This entry gives a very candid insight into the thoughts that go through my head when I get into that state. So this episode is really going to be about my general experience of depression and what it looks like for me. Many of these journal entries I don't actually remember writing, to be honest, but this one I remember quite vividly. In the basement of the research center where I used to work, there was a recreation room with table football and comfy sofas. I can remember hiding in that room in the middle of the day writing this journal entry. I've talked a little bit about my depression before, but only in passing. For clarity, I don't suffer from full clinical depression. I am aware that there are people who have it much worse than me. I've never really needed medication. I've always been able to just about function and continue to get out of bed and work and so on. My depression is relatively moderate in that respect, but it can be severe at times. And it has certainly impacted my life and my relationships, and I have certainly needed treatment for it more than once, mainly in the form of cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm being treated for it right now, as it happens, while making this episode. Before I read out the journal entry, if you've listened to the show before and you've liked it and you found it interesting, I would really appreciate it if you could take just 1 minute of your time to leave a review or some stars or hearts or thumbs or whatever you use to show your appreciation wherever you are listening to this. If you normally subscribe and follow things, please subscribe and follow this podcast too. I've also started a Reddit channel where you can join the conversation. Links to everything are in the show notes. So have a listen to the reading now, and I'll be back at the end to share my thoughts with you after 12 years of hindsight. Enjoy. June 2014. I've been very, very reclusive in the last 6 months. Any joy in my life seems to revolve around watching geeky TV shows off the internet and getting lost in another world. That's the only thing giving me any comfort or joy right now. I think I've lost passion for my work. I submitted the snail manuscript 3 weeks ago now. I didn't feel the slightest bit of happiness when I did. I just felt numb, as if something big, shocking and grand happened right in front of me, and I felt nothing. I'm back on the fish project now, but for some reason, it's not thrilling me. I genuinely don't care about it anymore. I'm reading a new paper now too, rad-tag sequencing on eels. But I'm just getting so sick of reading the same thing over and over again. What does it matter? They're fucking eels. What's the point? I wonder and worry if I might be depressed. I just want to spend time on my own because that feels safe somehow. I have such little life. I go to work. When I am at work, I seek every opportunity to be on my own. I always have lunch on my own now. I'm even hiding in the basement recreation room right now. I have no motivation to engage with anyone. I haven't built up a network of people around me at work. Then I go home and spend the evening alone. Once or twice a week maybe, I might go to improv. If I'm honest, that's not thrilling me anymore either. I'm feeling really numb towards improv too, and even to the people, the closest thing I have to a social group. The time I spend alone is damaging, I think. Although it feels comfortable at the time, it feels like what I actually want and need. When I do end up in social situations, like going for a drink after improv rehearsal, I feel very socially awkward and I can't wait to leave. Perhaps I've conditioned myself to like being cooped up alone. I've reinforced that behavior positively and now I crave it. I'm basically becoming my parents. I think this is why they've always felt socially awkward in restaurants and public spaces. They've conditioned themselves to avoid those situations and prefer being at home. I've always been so determined not to end up like them, but the older I get, the more similar to them I become. I try to think back to when I felt at my best, when I actually felt happy and positive, but it's like I can't remember. Maybe I haven't fully recovered from what happened to me when I got back from Turkey last October. This is when my boss told me that I wasn't doing well enough, and he was annoyed at me for underperforming. This followed a period of me putting so much effort in, thinking that working as hard as I could would be good enough. That was a huge knock to my confidence. I lost passion for work at that point, and I haven't got it back since. I dealt with it by becoming increasingly antisocial. I didn't really talk to anyone about these things at the time, only briefly to some people, but I largely kept it to myself. I don't think there is anyone in the world that actually knows what's happening in my life right now. I had ample opportunity to talk to people, but I consistently chose not to. It feels like I never really dealt with any of these things, and now I'm stuck in a pattern of unhealthy behavior. All of my problems, well, all of my perceived problems in my life, are a result of me not dealing with the root cause of them. But who can I talk to? I've isolated myself so much from everyone. Forcing myself to be more social and looking at careers advice perhaps isn't the answer. Being antisocial and feeling disillusioned about my career are just the symptoms, not the cause. If I do deal with what happened to me emotionally, I will naturally end up being more social, and I'll figure out what I want from my career. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that. As usual, I've written down some thoughts after reading that back and hearing that back. Like I said before, I remember writing this entry quite distinctly, for a few reasons, I think. This was quite an important turning point for me in realizing there was something up with my mental health. Sharing this journal entry with you makes me feel quite vulnerable, I guess. As I said in the entry, I never really shared a lot of these things with anyone back then and in the years that followed. There's a few topics I want to touch on now. I want to explore that empty feeling that I had after submitting that paper. I want to talk about the role that seeking solitude has played in my life. And when I was writing the analysis, I ended up thinking about bigger questions about being good enough. And I think this journal entry is quite interesting for just sharing my general experience of my form of depression. Before we get into the reflection, I want to ask you a quick question. Do you ever worry about your paper being rejected because the English isn't good enough? One thing I've always been good at is writing, but I know not everyone finds that easy. Perhaps English isn't your first language, or for some reason, the words you write just don't quite capture what you want to say. Good English can enhance your scientific credibility, increase the chance of your article being accepted, and speed up the peer review process. Whether you're a research scientist, a scientific writer, or part of a dynamic biotech company, I want to help you with my professional copy editing and proofreading services for scientific English. Enhancing the clarity and precision of writing has been an integral part of my professional life in academia and in the biotech industry for over a decade. If you need a native English speaker with a solid scientific background and a professional certification in proofreading to refine and polish your writing, I would love to help you. Please visit simitpatel.com, that's simitpatel.com for more information. Thank you, and now back to the show. So I had finally submitted a research paper with my name as the first author, but it didn't bring me any joy or a sense of relief. This was everything I was working towards, the end goal. Those of you who have submitted papers before understand just how much work goes into these things and how much time and effort. But I felt nothing. I just didn't care at that point. This was quite a pivotal moment for me, and I remember it quite vividly for a couple of reasons. Firstly, this is when I knew that there was something abnormal with my mental health. That numbness and apathy that I was feeling was not a quote-unquote normal way for me to behave when I achieved something. Up until that point in my life, I had achieved lots of things. So I had a baseline for knowing how it, quote-unquote, should feel for me. That buzz that I would normally get from feeling like I achieved something would normally spread and enhance all other aspects of my life. But this time, something was different. That numbness and that apathy ended up spreading through all aspects of my life. The things I usually loved, I started to hate. Things that usually excited me started to stress me out. I usually love research papers on obscure animals and things that no one else usually cares about, like snails, for example. But I got really angry at those eels for some reason. I started to not like doing improv anymore. And this is not because there was anything wrong with improv itself or the people. This was just my general state of mind making everything negative. I think the fact that I submitted that paper later than I thought I should have still made it feel like a bit of a failure rather than a success. Secondly, this moment stands out to me in my memory because this is another one of those moments where I just knew that staying in academia in the long term just wasn't right for me. Academia is all about submitting papers, one after the other for the rest of your life, basically. If that wasn't giving me the joy and that good feeling, I knew that I wasn't suited to staying in academia. At the time, I didn't really fully understand that, but now I do. It was the endlessness of academia that I really didn't like. When a piece of work is complete, you end up with more loose ends than you had before you started. Most academic research generates more questions and uncertainty about a topic than answers and clarity about the truth. The last line of almost every research paper is more research is needed on this topic. And that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that per se, but for me, it felt like climbing a mountain that just never ended, or digging a hole that just got deeper and deeper and more pointless. Eventually, I understood that I just prefer to work in a different format. I much prefer small, finite, bite-sized pieces of work that just finished when they're finished. That's why I ended up being more suited to working in something like tech support. Each tech support ticket you get is a small, finite piece of work. In most cases, it can be resolved, and then that's it, case closed. I wrote about wanting to seek solitude at every opportunity. This often accompanies depression for me, back when I wrote this entry, and even today. In the entry, I was debating whether it was a good thing or not. And to be honest, I still debate that bit today. In the entry, I thought it might be actually doing me more damage in the long run, but at the same time, it would actually feel quite good and safe. It occurs to me that how I described it in that journal entry, I think I was describing it almost like an addiction, just something that feels good in the short term, in the moment, but you know it's probably not good for you in the long term. But how do I feel about that today, with the benefit of hindsight and a bit more life experience and just knowing myself a bit better? Whether it's a good thing or not is actually irrelevant. It's kind of the wrong question. For better or worse, I think seeking solitude is just an inherent part of my personality. On balance, I think solitude has been more of a superpower for me than something that has caused me damage overall. Over the years, I've learnt to lean into all the good things that solitude has given me. It gives me freedom, it gives me time to think, it gives me self-reliance, independence. It's given me confidence. Now, I can quite comfortably go to the cinema or go for a meal or go on holiday by myself. But there is a lot of people that cannot do that. Solitude has been damaging for me too. For example, when I'm depressed in particular, having more time to yourself to think can sometimes amplify a lot of those negative thoughts. Shutting people out can also be very hurtful to other people, and it can badly affect relationships. In the entry, I talked about isolating myself so much that I didn't really have anyone to talk to even when I needed to. But look, judging it as a good thing or a bad thing is actually completely irrelevant, and it's really the wrong question. Seeking solitude is just part of my personality. Understanding that and accepting that about myself, for better or worse, is far more valuable than judging it as right or wrong or good or bad. In the entry, I referenced still being slightly traumatized from a period of time several months before, after I got back from holiday in Turkey. I haven't included a specific journal entry about this period of time in the podcast because, in addition to work stuff and being told that I was underperforming in terms of publications, grants, etc. by my boss, there were some slightly more personal things that were happening to me in my life that I really didn't feel like sharing. So I skipped a lot of those journal entries for this podcast, but I've included a reference to it here in this episode because what was going on in my personal life and at work seemed to follow the same theme. And it's a very interesting theme that I thought was worth discussing because I've been dealing a lot with it recently. It seemed that at that time, no matter how hard I tried and how much effort I put in, I was getting the message that it just wasn't good enough. And I had this naive belief at the time that if you just try your best, you will get ahead, not just at work, but in everything. And being told that it just wasn't good enough was a real big blow to my confidence. And I wrote it there, and I still agree today to a large extent that I never really recovered from that moment. I was recently asked a really interesting question on a similar topic. And that question was, how much is enough? What is the definition of enough? What does it look like? When I was asked this question, I thought about it for a minute, and I ended up saying something like, doing enough is doing the maximum you possibly can with the time and energy that you have, and not doing any more than you're actually capable of. I genuinely believed that when I said it, and after I said it out loud, I thought, that doesn't really make any sense. Surely the definition of quote-unquote enough is actually doing the minimum amount necessary, not the maximum. If something is enough, that means, by definition, it's just over the line that it needs to be at and not more. I've been setting that line at the maximum level possible that someone can possibly do. It should actually be at the minimum, surely. So when I said that, I realized that my definition of what is enough has become so distorted through my upbringing, through my relationships, through my education, through academia, capitalism, society, whatever it is, into something that it just isn't. So back when I was writing this journal entry and I was getting this signal, this message that I just wasn't good enough through work and everything outside of work, it really hit me hard because I had such a deeply ingrained and distorted definition of what being enough meant. Back then, and even until recently, I thought that working your absolute hardest was what enough looked like. If I wasn't doing that, I wasn't doing enough. Right now, I'm kind of reworking my relationship on the concept of enough and just generally being good enough and what that means. I'm still trying to figure it out because it is quite hard to reprogram something that is so deeply ingrained. But I think I'm at a different point I am now today than I was when I wrote this journal entry with regards to that question of what is enough. One thing that stands out to me when I look back on this journal entry is just in general is that it was such a complex mix of thoughts and emotions that I was going through at the time. There was a sense of numbness at work and outside of work. There was loneliness. There was feeling a lack of connection to other people. There was seeking time to myself. There was some social anxiety in there with regard to being around others. There was a need for escapism. There was disillusionment with science and my field of research. There was anger. I got really angry at those eels. There was being judgmental and self-critical of myself. There was feeling numb towards things I normally enjoy. There's a sense of hopelessness. There was a sense of feeling trapped and being stuck in a situation. This very much reflects my experience of depression and why it's so hard for me to deal with. And it's still hard today when it happens to me. For me, it's not just a simple problem. There's not a straight line between something that's happening to me and me feeling sad. It's just not as simple as that. It's so many different thoughts, emotions, behaviors. My experience of depression is very noisy. It's a lot of things all at once, and everything is so intense in the moment. That complexity is one of the things that makes it so hard for me to explain it to someone. I even wrote in the journal entry that I really didn't talk to anyone about these things that were bothering me at the time, let alone to a professional. At the time, this was one of the things that really stopped me from trying to seek any help from a friend or from professionals or whoever. And actually, in many years afterwards, the complexity of my experience of depression always was a barrier. I thought to myself, if I didn't understand it, how could I possibly articulate it to someone? What if I leave something out and didn't explain it properly? What if someone misunderstands me? That complexity, or rather my perceived complexity, was a real barrier that prevented me from seeking any help from anyone. At the time, and for many years afterwards, I just didn't have those communication skills. I never learnt them and I didn't practice them. I wasn't ready then. It took me years and a lot of failure to reach a point where I felt like I could talk about my feelings to another person. It was probably in my early to mid-30s when I figured it out. Before then, it was just easier to keep it all to myself and to write about it in a journal. Something else that stood out to me when I revisited this journal entry was how similar my experience of depression is today with my experience of it back then. Although I must say I'm making a lot of progress, particularly in the last year or so, in dealing with it when it happens. When I suffer from depression today, the feeling is very much the same in my body. The thoughts are similar too. And some of those behaviors of seeking solitude, where being around other people just stresses me out and makes me feel worse, that's all the same too. It makes me realize that my depression is basically a part of the same cycle that's just repeating itself over and over. It's like having a learned pathway of thoughts and feelings and behaviors just programmed into your brain. Once it gets activated, kind of like computer code, it just executes in the order in which it's written. Like I say, I have gotten a lot better today, though. In the past year, in particular, I've learned how to recognize those thoughts and behavior patterns much earlier on when I start slipping. And I figured out strategies to resolve it when it's still a smaller problem, rather than letting it fester until it becomes a much bigger problem, which was my coping strategy back then and until a few years ago as well. And this is mostly down to a lot of the work that I've done with therapy in the past year. And a lot of it, to be honest, is just a lot of trial and error on my part too. I was still very analytical. For example, I was trying to make sense of solitude in the context of positively reinforcing my antisocial behavior and mirroring the behavior of my parents. And I ended up arriving at this conclusion that there was a single root cause of my problems that I hadn't dealt with. While there might be grains of truth in this, it's got me thinking a lot about my analytical approach in general. Today, I am still very analytical. That's very much part of my instinct. I am a problem solver. I make sense of the world through cause and effect relationships. I'm a scientist. But after years of taking this analytical approach, I realize now that it can only take you so far. I notice that when I apply analytical reasoning today, I am very much limited to only using the knowledge that I currently have. If I'm trying to make sense of a topic like my mental health, for example, and I don't have all the knowledge on it, I can end up drawing the wrong conclusion sometimes. But I think that I'm correct because I've applied an analytical approach. It's kind of like having a large jigsaw puzzle, but only having a few of the pieces to work with. You can do your best to fit those pieces together in a logical way, an analytical way that makes the most sense given the pieces that you have. But the final result probably won't be correct because you just don't have enough pieces and there's too many pieces or knowledge missing. I think a lot of the work that I've done on my mental health in the past decade or so has been about gaining more knowledge, gaining more pieces of the puzzle, as it were, just to make better analytical sense of what I'm feeling. I got that knowledge through, journaling, podcasts, talking with people, reading, learning how to talk to people about these things, learning those communication skills, and of course, therapy. At times, therapy has felt a bit like having a psychology tutor. Today, I still have an analytical approach, but I have more pieces of the puzzle. And I can recognize when I don't have all the pieces, and I can accept that I'm just missing some knowledge on a topic, and I know where to go to get those pieces. So there you have it. That was a snapshot of what goes through my mind when I get depressed sometimes. One thing that stood out to me revisiting that journal entry is just how few people I've shared any of those thoughts with. I can't think of a single friend or colleague at the time that I'd shared any of those things with. So I'm really grateful for you for taking the time to listen. That is a very valuable thing that you've just done for me. In the next episode, we jump to just a few days later. I'm pleased to report that I had taken some action to make myself feel better, and I was even starting to think about taking some holidays. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that was valuable for you in some way. Until next time, please be kind to yourself.
Brood about it, brood until the day, one day I will find the words to say.
Thanks again for listening to A Postdoc's Journal. I've been your host, Simit Patel. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others who you think might find it helpful and interesting. You could also leave a review over at Podchaser or on Apple Podcasts. If you can relate to anything in this episode, or if you have your own take on that journal entry, I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Blue Sky, or Reddit. Links to all my social media are in the show notes. Thanks again.